All right. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Good afternoon. I am Erin McGurl, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's event, Secrets of a Lapsed Librarian, How I Use Bookseller Resources, Library Resources as a Bookseller. I am speaking to you today from Nonotuck land in Shutesbury, Massachusetts, but the BSA's office has traditionally been situated on the ancestral homeland of the Lenape in Brooklyn, New York. I invite you to share and read the BSA's land acknowledgement. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat now. And if you want to share your own land acknowledgement in the chat, we are always welcoming you to do that. So also, before I begin, I want to make sure, I know you've all seen it already, but I'll remind you again about the BSA's Code of Conduct for our events. I'd like to thank our captioner today for making this event more accessible. And finally, before I fully hand things over, I wanted to let folks know that the bibliographyweek.org website is now up and running. We have a preliminary calendar of events there. I just put a link in the chat. And we hope you'll join us in January for Bib Week. So without further ado, I will hand our session over to Patrick Olson, a bookseller with over a decade of experience in libraries. Patrick will speak for about 45 minutes today, and then we'll turn it over to a Q&A. And to submit a question to Patrick, please enter it into the Q&A box. All attendees can see, comment on, and upvote questions, and we ask you to do this to help us prioritize questions of greatest interest to today's audience. Please also engage in conversations using Zoom's chat feature, but if you submit a question via the chat, I will just ask you to re-enter it into the Q&A box. So without further ado, one more thing. We have a co-sponsor for today's event. Thank you so much to the IOBA and Douglas Nelson for joining with us and bringing this program to our audiences. We're really thrilled to be partnering with you. So take it away, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. All right. So yeah, like Erin said, I'm Patrick Olson. I'm a bookseller. I started out in the trade when I was in college, but then I did spend about 10 years in libraries. So I worked as a rare book cataloger, eventually a curator, and then eventually head of special collections. And so I've got some broad experience working in libraries. And so hopefully I'll impart some of what I learned in those years to all of you today. And yeah, I'd like to thank the Bibliographical Society of America and the Independent Online Booksellers Association for sponsoring today's talk. So this will be something of a whirlwind tour. We may not get to every slide, but the later slides, and I might as well go ahead and start the slideshow right now. Let's see here. All right, so can you guys see the, let me back up a little bit here. Can you see my slides? All right, perfect, thank you. Like I said, something of a whirlwind tour. We may not get to every slide, but the later slides are pretty self-explanatory and mostly lists, links for other resources, which I will make available in BibSite for use later on. And so we're gonna focus on demoing a few resources that I use pretty much every day. And the recording will be on YouTube, so you'll be able to refer back to this. So if I maybe covered something more quickly than you would have liked, you should be able to go back and kind of rewatch as you need to. Some of this may be especially relevant to early books. That's what I handle, early continental European material, mostly print. Many of these tools will be more broadly useful, so even those of you who handle modern material will hopefully find much of it useful. And my goal here primarily is to share some tips on how to locate useful resources and how these resources themselves can serve as research tools. So I want to emphasize that this is only how I use these resources, and many of them are doubtless more powerful than I'm going to demonstrate today. And admittedly, we're going to just be kind of scratching the surface. And some of you may surely have richer experience with them. And so I encourage you all to later on kind of play around and see what they're all capable of. And there are probably other resources I know nothing about. So, you know, by all means, feel free to share any good tips. But hopefully it'll be a good time. It's Friday afternoon. I think we can go ahead and consider this the start of the weekend. So grab some pizza, some Mountain Dew, and yeah, let's have fun. All right, so a couple weeks back, there was a really interesting discussion on the IOBA discussion list about going down rabbit holes when cataloging material. And I suppose I probably do this with some regularity. And so like the slide here is sort of an example of one of my notes fields. And I think for most might agree that there's, well, at least I think there are as many ways to sell books as there are booksellers. And so for me, my book selling, underlying it is a philosophy of adding value through research, which, admittedly, like a $50 book may not have enough margin to admit that kind of labor. But I do care about adding value. For one, these books can be expensive, and I want to provide some real intellectual labor to my customers, most of whom are librarians, curators. And so as you see this reference field here from one of my catalog records, I just dump all kinds of useful information in there, even if it doesn't make it into the description itself, so that my customers have recourse to that should they want it down the road for, a class, an exhibit, whatever it might be. And of course, that research is then available to me pretty readily down the line for something in the future. Now, this isn't entirely altruistic. I once heard a bookseller remark that his principle is he catalogs something just enough to sell it. And frankly, my descriptions may not be short, but I feel like I'm doing the same thing, but more specifically to kind of sell it quickly. I feel like if I provide enough context and information, it will, more people will be able to sort of imagine that item in their collection, and it might more quickly find a good home. So I, am not independently wealthy, and I cannot afford to sit on everything. So I do aim for fairly quick turnaround. And again, I assume everyone out there knows very little about what I sell. This is not because I think, the librarians and curators I work with are unintelligent, but I think it reflects the nature of curatorial responsibility these days, where you could have one individual who perhaps has expertise, a PhD in 20th century American labor history, who suddenly finds themselves responsible for not only developing modern collections, but for also developing a library's collection of early books. And so they may not have kind of the same context and knowledge that I might have to sort of appreciate why a particular early book might be a good fit for their collection. So I try to make that easier for those who may not have all the knowledge that kind of informs that context. Again, I don't expect anyone to take me at face value. I am, at the end of the day, a salesperson. And so I like to ground my descriptions in reliable scholarship and cite those sources whenever possible. All right, so enough about my philosophy. I'm going to talk about WorldCat for a bit here. And those of you, I'm sure most of you are familiar with WorldCat. It's the largest international online catalog of library resources. Morgan Brennan gave a great talk a few weeks ago for IOBA on booksellers using WorldCat. So I'm going to take off from her point, and I don't think I'm going to repeat anything here. Now, Morgan made a great point that WorldCat is not a replacement for bibliographies. And I agree entirely. And I also think the inverse is true, that bibliographies are not replacements for WorldCat. So a print bibliography is ideally accurate only to the time of publication. And even then, they can often miss scarce editions. Editions discovered after its publication, for example, will only be recorded in online catalogs. So here on my slide, I've got on the left, this is a 1525 edition of Terence, edited by Philip Melanchthon. And it was not in one of the standard bibliographies of Terence. Again, it's a pretty scarce edition, and Giovanni Cupaiuolo did not manage to scare up a copy when he was doing his work. Not unusual, but relying only on that bibliography would result in a misstatement about which Melanchthon edition I have in hand. So this may be more of an issue for earlier books, which may have had centuries for editions to disappear, and today might be represented by just a single copy nestled in some provincial library off the beaten path. And so again, if I don't find it in a print bibliography, I want to supplement that by using WorldCat. So without further ado, let's go to WorldCat. All right. So my search principle is, I typically start by casting a wide net and I narrow it from there. So I am in WorldCat. So if nobody can see WorldCat, let me know. So I'm just going to do a basic, simple search, Terence, Melanchthon. I don't know why I chose Melanchthon. I misspell the name half the time. So I'm courting disaster here. All right, and so this is where and then I go up here and I want to sort my results by least recent, because I'm always looking for the oldest edition and where does mine fall in that chronology. And we got 136 hits, and I think that's pretty good. You can scroll down and you'll see unusual dates will kind of, crop up to the top with no date defined. You see 4 U's, 15 dash. And then you get to where it actually starts, 1516, 1516, 1526. It starts building, but I'm already thinking, all right, I feel like I'm missing some. I feel like there should be more records that I'm getting. And at this point, I recall that WorldCat is an international database, and that not every library reporting holdings is going to use Terence as the author's heading. So let's try the more ubiquitous Terentius, his Latin spelling. And here you can see we got 340 results. Sort by least recent. And so what I would do here is, how I sort of helped with this 1525 Terence I had. Let's kind of sort through this and to see, how exactly where my 1525 edition fit into the broader chronology of Melanchthon's edition of Terence, because I had already established that the print bibliography was incomplete, and I wanted to supplement that knowledge with a collection of editions that was updated in more real time. Now, there's a bonus here. Due to enhanced cataloging rules that are often used for early books, records sometimes contain collation and other useful bibliographical details that are typically found only in bibliographies. So if your bibliography doesn't have, a collation statement, something like that, and you'd like to find one for the sake of comparison, whatever your reasons, if you go through some of the WorldCat records, you may find a collation statement that's been provided. And I should, a little caveat here, despite their legendary attention to detail, library catalogers are human and they do sometimes make mistakes. I was one for a number of years. A single mistranscribed letter can result in a negative hit. And there have been plenty of times where I've had to explain away inaccurately described books. I might find in WorldCat, some library is reporting a copy that's, 10 years earlier than what is the first edition. And then you have to kind of work your way back and they misread a Roman numeral, something like that. So there are plenty of errors in WorldCat. All right. Now I mentioned this Terence bibliography I used. And so actually, let's go back to my slides here because this is a little instructive. Okay. So I did find the Terence bibliography pretty quickly using Library of Congress subdivisions, and we're going to get to that. Now, typically, I first turn to Theodore Besterman's World Bibliography of Bibliographies, which you see on this slide here in the lonely single entry for Terence. Really, just one for Terence? I mean, I know he's not Virgil, but he's somebody. So in any case, I'm like, all right, this is not exactly what I'm looking for. I would like to find something else. I do like Besterman for a number of reasons. Because of its sort of mid-century age, many of his sources do end up being available digitally in Google Books or HathiTrust. So it's wonderful to be able to quickly tap those. But again, not everything is in Besterman, and especially the latest bibliographies and catalogs. So I do often turn to WorldCat to find what I want. So let's go back to WorldCat, and we're going to find that a basic understanding of Library of Congress subject headings and how they are constructed and subdivided can help you quickly find all kinds of useful resources. So for those who aren't familiar, LCSH, or Library of Congress subject headings, are an example of what's broadly called a controlled vocabulary. So catalogers who are contributing records to WorldCat or any sort of constituent database are sort of prescribed to use these particular subject headings, these controlled vocabularies, when they're making their records. The idea here is that controlled vocabularies will avoid a complete free-for-all in WorldCat. And you would be forgiven for thinking that maybe that isn't always the case. There's plenty of there's still some free-for-all in WorldCat. I think we can all be honest about that. But let's say I'm gonna do a simple search, or I want to find a better or any Terence bibliography. So I'm going to the simple search box. I'm just gonna, dump in Terence bibliography. Let's see what we get. All right, you can see here 2,200 hits. But time is money. I don't have time to go through 2,200 hits to find like a useful Terence bibliography, okay? So let's try the advanced search, this little sort of adjustable icon here. And let me move my view out of the way. All right, so we're going to go with this first line in the advanced search, and I'm going to go with subject words. All right, if you haven't messed around with this, I want to search for subject words that have Terence and bibliography in them. All right, so let's try this. Okay, oh, where's my search? There you are. All right, 54 hits. This is much more reasonable. Like I can scroll through 54 hits to find what I'm looking for. And if you want, I'll even often sort by most recent to find the latest bibliography. Scroll down, all right, catalog of the country, link, share the place, all right, this looks an annotated now. In any case, so this is, and actually I think this is the one I found, yeah, this is the one I used. So you can see, by getting away from the standard simple search and moving in to an advanced search and selecting subject words, you can much more quickly find what you're looking for. And it's searching a WorldCat, it's all about balancing recall, casting a wide net with precision. And that's always kind of the line I'm towing here. And this also helped me find a 17th century source that I was able to sort of use and quote in my description. All right, so that's Terence. And again, from Besterman, we saw maybe Terence isn't as popular as some other writers. So let's try somebody else. Let's try somebody more challenging. Let's go back to our subject search and let's try William Shakespeare bibliography. And let's see what we get. All right. 2,400 hits. All right. And again, this is not just like a basic keyword search. This is actually searching subject terms in the catalog records for William Shakespeare and bibliography. And again, I don't have time to go through 2,400 hits to find the best thing. But you can do things. That doesn't mean that these records are useless. Let's open one up and take a look. Click on Show More Information. And then look at these subject headings. All right. All of these are hyperlinked, and you can click on any one of them for similar material. So for example, this looks useful. Shakespeare, William, bibliography. Let's click on that and see what we get. And now you're going to notice here, we still got 2,400 hits. So that was not nearly as useful as I wanted it to be. All right. So, but this is a good start. We have this subject search. We have this heading. All right. So you can see it's got a command line thing here with the little SU colons. It's sort of going to default to a subject search. But let's copy this heading, the string of subject words, and go back to our search, make sure it's in there. And now we're going to do something important here. We're going to add quotes. And that's going to not just search all of those words, but it's going to search all of those words in this particular order. and let's see what we get. Making 31 hits. This is what I'm looking for. All right, that's a manageable amount of resources to wade through. All right, I'm sorting by most recent. And look at this, our first hit, Shakespeare in Print, a history and chronology of Shakespeare publishing. This sounds like a tremendously useful kind of thing and just the kind of thing we're looking for. All right. Now, for the sake of argument, I just want to go back and we're going to try something a little different. Let's remove Shakespeare's dates. We'll leave the quotes and let's see what happens. 4 hits. So clearly something is going wrong here. All right. That's because we are not using Shakespeare's authorized heading. So when I say authorized heading, I mean the form of his name, which, you know, for individuals, the name will often include their vital dates. The authorized form of his name that library catalogers in the US are prescribed to use in creating their catalog records. All right, so here we are. We're going to move from WorldCat to the Library of Congress Authorities website, authorities.loc.gov. All right, we want to make sure we find Shakespeare's proper authorized heading. And this is a clunky website, so bear with me. We're going to search authorities. We're going to do name authority headings. And I know that, you know, authorities are searched, are indexed by last name. So I'm going to do last name first. Let's see what we get. Okay. And what are we looking for? We're looking for a heading here that has authorized next to it, just like this one. And then we see this Shakespeare William 1564 to 1616. We know those are his dates. There are like 8,500 records that are using it in some capacity. So that looks like the right one. Now, if you want to, you can click on that red button. Loading. Actually, this is a good time to take a drink of water. All right. And here we got heading 1XX. If you open one of these up, you'll get into this really librarianish mark formatting, basically a coded markup language. And it's this 100 field. This is the authorized heading we want. So it is this Shakespeare William 1564 to 1616. So if we go back, you know, you can see here, heading 1XX, that's the authorized form of the name. So that is the version that we want to use when we're doing our subject search. All right. Okay. Now, how do we know that bibliography is the best subdivision? All right. So the quick overview, these headings, whether it's for an individual or a subject, can be subdivided in any number of prescribed ways. And bibliography is one of those subdivisions, which allows you to find bibliographies of individuals, bibliographies on particular subjects. So how do we know that bibliography is the best subdivision? Sometimes you can, if you go to the Library of Congress authority files, you can stumble upon what you want. So let's say we're looking for a bibliography on electrical engineering. We're going to search subject authority headings. All right. Now, if you start scrolling through all of these hits, you're going to see the topic subdivided in any number of ways. And a number of them will have these authorized heading red buttons next to them. So these are very useful. So electrical engineering amateurs manuals, electrical engineering awards. So if you scroll down, here we see electrical engineering bibliography. Well, that seems useful. So you can actually just go in, copy this. All right, go back to WorldCat. Make sure you've got subjects selected. Pop it in, and we're going to put it in quotes, all right, because we want that particular string of text. See what you get. And, you know, here's a possibility. Not as much as we wanted. But, you know, I don't do electrical engineering anyway. So, but that's just to kind of show you how you can find subject headings that will be used in WorldCat and pair them with the bibliography subdivision to find resources that might be useful. Now, there is another option. Over here, the Library of Congress maintains a static PDF of all of the authorized subdivisions, date subdivisions. And so if you're interested in kind of the sheer volume of the kinds of searches you can do in WorldCat by combining subdivisions, this might be worth taking a look at. But you can scroll down to the, B, and let's see what you're looking for. Is bibliography an authorized heading? Bibliography of bibliographies. And yeah, bibliography continued. And here it is, bibliography. Used as a form subdivision, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, yeah, it is authorized heading. All right, so none of this is intuitive. All right, this is, and professional catalogers have access to much more sophisticated subscription-based tools to help them navigate this sort of, unending complex of information and subject headings. So we are kind of stuck using these clunkier public access models. So again, it's not intuitive, and don't feel like you have to come away completely understanding how to use these today. The idea is to know that these subdivisions exist, and they can be tremendously useful to more efficiently find resources that you might want to use in your work. And by kind of understanding how headings are constructed and then how to construct your own can be tremendously useful when you're trying to find something in a database like WorldCat, which I think I looked the other day has like 76 million records. And so any techniques that can, sort the wheat from the chaff are going to be tremendously helpful. All right. So, so I stapled my papers together out of order, but you guys, I persevered. Thanks for bearing with me. All right, so that is a bit on personal subject headings. So let's go ahead and return to my slides here and look at this thing here. So I have, all right, big slideshow view. I have the 1729 history of Venetian trade. I'm like, all right, this is interesting. I'm gonna be honest. I had some buyer's remorse. I was like, is this really interesting? Am I going to be able to sell this? But when I started digging into it, I noticed that the standard bibliography on Venice and of Venetian imprints had no earlier sort of histories of trade in Venice. Like, really? 1729? Is it the earliest one? Now, to verify that, you're looking at maybe days of probably fruitless research, looking for an authoritative answer in the secondary literature. And if you really want to be sure, you could go through everything on Venetian business and the Biblioteca Marciana in Venice. But to be honest, we can do the next best thing and possibly even arrive at the same conclusion just by spending 10 minutes in WorldCat. And so when it comes to, if I encounter the first book on this topic, the first book on that topic, I always supplement that kind of statement, even when it's backed by an authoritative scholarly source. I supplement that with a WorldCat search just to make sure that I'm not missing anything else. But again, with millions of records, how do we conduct a search that is going to sort of like ideally balance recalling enough material to be sure and precision so that we don't get more than we can handle? So let's return to WorldCat. Okay. So back to the idea of subdivisions. All right. Let's actually start. So we want to know, like, we go to our advanced search, right? And we take subject. We're like, what, where do I even begin? What terms do it? Venice seems obvious, but I feel like Venice is just plugging in Venice is going to get me way more than I need. All right. So let's go over here to our authorities. We're going to do Venice, subject authority headings, see what we got. We can start scrolling through. You see a lot of businesses and institutions named after Venice, the Biennale, etc. Civilization, Venice. And here we see Venice, Florida. And then you can start to piece together how the heading is constructed. You're going to have the city followed by the larger jurisdiction in parentheses. I'm like, all right, this is great. So this is a good place to start. All right. Okay, but now if I just go with that, I'm going to get way more than I get. I'm looking for the history of trade in Venice, not everything on Venice. So how can I subdivide that farther? Well, you can go back to this PDF here, and you can browse around. So like, you know, here B, business. Is business something I can use? All right, buildings, bumpers, burial, business management. So no, it looks like business is not something I can use. Let's go down to T. Maybe trade is an authorized subdivision. All right. Where are we at? T, there, thermal fatigue, trade policy, tombs, tours, track and field. Let's see, trade. All right, so here's trade. But now under trade, it says to use commerce. I'm like, great. All right, this narrows me down. So commerce is what they want me to use. Okay, so I plugged it into my subject search. All right. And I want the history. I want the history of commerce in Venice. So you can go back here and you can play around. You know, you can scroll up and let's go to H. All right. H, there's I. Okay, history. All right, history. All right, history local, history and criticism. Okay. So it looks like history. Here's history. Topical subdivision. So definitely a subdivision we can use. So let's plug in history. All right. So we got a pretty robust subdivided subject heading. So let's see what we do. Let's put it in quotes. All right, because we're looking for some precision here. Search. And actually, let's redo that, right? My book is 1729. I don't need to look at anything after 1729. We'll set it at 1450 to start. Okay. And there's nothing. I got no hits. And so I'm starting to think that it's true that there are no sort of earlier histories of Venetian trade. Now, to make sure that I didn't have like a weird search, I'm going to broaden my date range just to be sure that the search itself. And now I'm like, surely, all right, is there really? There's got to be something. And there are a few things, but this is just I do this so to sort of reinforce this idea. So a bibliography may be telling me one thing, and if the bibliography is telling me that, yeah, this is the earliest this or earliest that, I like to go to WorldCat, do my own search just to kind of shore up that claim. And I'll still throw a question mark after it. I like to hedge my bets because you never know if you're missing something. But yeah, so again, it's all about balancing recall and precision. All right. And again, if you want a shortcut, you can go to Venice, Italy. You can scroll through all of this if you want. You know, and here you go. You get to Venice, Italy, commerce, history. So if you don't want to bother with this PDF, this is another thing you can try. Just scroll through the authorities file to find what you're looking for. Okay. Now let's try something else. Let's do we're going to do a subject search here for just Venice trade history, not commerce, but trade. Well, let's leave it at 2023 for demonstration purposes. You'll see we're not getting as much. And that's because we are not using the language that the Library of Congress has asked us to use when making these catalog records. So this is just to show you that if you don't use the prescribed vocabulary, you risk missing out on books you want to know about. And so it's worth making an effort to figure out exactly what that authorized subject heading is going to be. All right. So the challenge here, all right, so like the Library of Congress subject headings are not intuitive. All right, again, don't feel like you're unintelligent for not grasping them. The challenge here is to take your own kind of the descriptive terms that you come up with in your own head. The challenge and the fundamental task is to map your own terms to Library of Congress subject headings. That is the power that's going to allow you to sort of really find what you're looking for in WorldCat. All right. And so it can be incredibly powerful if you know how to use it. And not just for WorldCat, these same principles apply to pretty much every library catalog in the US. So if you want to know what a particular library has, you can apply the same search techniques to their local online library catalog. And while WorldCat doesn't report all the world's libraries, these principles of heading construction are pretty common across many countries, and you can combine those principles with language skills to navigate other large catalogs in a similar fashion. All right. So that's WorldCat. Let's move on. There's more to see. Okay. Standard citation forms. All right. This is something I use this a lot in my librarian days. So Standard Citation Forms is a website maintained by the Bibliographic Standards Committee of the Rare Book and Manuscript section of ACRL, a division of ALA. So the Bibliographic Standards Committee is really a tremendously dedicated group of professional library catalogers from across the country who basically manage the rules and resources that rare book catalogers use across the country. And they produced all kinds of useful tools that are freely available. You can use them if you want. And the Standard Citation Forms database is one of them. So let's go ahead and let's do a quick tour. All right. So this is sort of the home screen for SCF by short, Standard Citation Forms. So there's a great example. What do I use this for? I use it for finding more complete details for resources that are often referred to by like a common short title. So the other day, actually it was yesterday, somebody on the ABA discussion list was like, hey, does anybody have a copy of Foxon's Bibliography on English Verse at hand? And it's Foxon is a fairly common bibliography, and it would have been not at all unusual to say, hey, does anybody have a copy of Foxon at hand? Like Foxon, what is Foxon? How are you expected to know all of these short titles? If you go to SCF and plug in Foxon, well, there you go. Foxon's English Verse, 1701 to 1750. All right. What these are the ways. This is a database of the way library catalogers are expected to properly cite canonical major bibliographies in their catalog records. And they used to be really kind of a shorthand, citation, just Foxon. And thankfully, they've been expanded to these more informative headings. But they can really help you figure out what some of these canonical bibliographies are when somebody is referring to them just by like some short title that you don't get, like Brunei. What is Brunei? You go here and it'll help you out. So if we look at this record, let's notice a couple of things. The old citation form, which is how we kind of got here just by searching for Foxon, and thankfully have been updated, and the subject headings, which you are all now tremendously familiar with. All right. These should be in Library of Congress authorized forms. So these subject headings that you see here are exactly the kind of thing you can plug into a WorldCat subject search to find more of the same information. All right. Another useful feature here, author and title browse. Okay. If somebody refers to something just by author or just by title, okay, great place to find it. And it also has a subject browse. Again, these are going to be subject headings that you can copy into a WorldCat search to make your life easier. So they're worth browsing. So I think of the SCF itself as kind of like good for browsing useful bibliographies. I think of it as kind of a convenient peer-reviewed list of bibliographies that are, maybe available for my use. But also perfect for locating those authorized headings to be used in WorldCat searches. All right. Next, let's go on to VIAF. Okay. Oh, here's Andrew. Yeah. Andrew's still looking for someone to help with Foxon. All right. So where are we going? We're going to VIAF. You guys, this is one of the resources I'm most excited to share with you today. This is, I think, a vastly underutilized resource. All right, so you remember that authorized heading for Shakespeare? What if I told you that every country had its own authorized heading for every individual, and that there was a database that collected all of them? This is VIAF, the Virtual International Authority File. So I will often use VIAF to settle on name spelling. Again, I work with early books. There's no straightforward matter. There are variant spellings of names. There are Latin names. There may be Greek names. And so I will typically use VIAF to sort of settle how I want to spell a given name. All right. Now, it's pretty broad recall can be very annoying. All right. 4,900 headings for Shakespeare. Like, oh, I don't want to go through all of that. You can, and Shakespeare is an extreme example. But something I really like it for, actually, let's go back to my slide here. I had this book with this name N de Lescaut. All right. Like, who is this guy? Can I do anything with this? Go to VIAF, and its predictive search default can be extremely powerful. So here I got Lescaut. I'm looking for Enda. Look at this guy, Nicolda. All right. Suddenly, you go, you look at him, look up the French again. So this is every library's authority record. Let's look at the French one. I'm like, all right. He's a legal expert. I'm like, this could legitimately be the guy who owned my book. So I use it a lot for that kind of thing, to identify individuals for whom I have incomplete names. But now, I think few appreciate just how much information has been stored in these records. So let's take Printer's Widows, for example. Let's do a search for, I think I had something by Dubrayer. All right. And I want to select the widow of Dubrayer. Okay, and I'll get rid of the dates just to help me cast a wider net. All right. Let's open up this record. Again, she's French. I like to defer to the French authority record. I feel like maybe it'll be more complete. And in here, you're going to find all kinds of useful information, actually full names. All right. A notice about her daughter, who was also involved in the business. Okay. And better yet, okay. One of the great things, library catalogers are expected to cite their sources. So buried in these authority records, you're going to find useful reference sources like Arber's, Women, 1600 to 1650. So much has been stored in these authorized records. It's worth digging into them. I know it's not a very clean interface, but if you can work through it, you're going to find a lot of useful stuff. Printers and publishers' addresses that can help precisely identify individuals with common names. Many records will cite particular titles by the individual, which can be helpful for sorting out complicated authorship situations. And look, if you don't speak French here, no problem. Google Translate has admittedly gotten pretty good these days. All right, we got like 2 minutes, 1 minute before I want to turn it over to questions. So let's show you one more thing before I'll just pass the slides along. And this is Archive Grid, okay? Archive Grid is a huge database of archival collections. It is heavily North American and US, but it is strictly speaking global in coverage. And if you go to, let me back up. I find it pretty useful for locating archives and manuscripts. So for example, there have been times where I've wanted to find examples of somebody's handwriting. My first stop is usually Archive Grid to see what library holds archival collections of that individual, and then how can I get a sample of their handwriting. Very useful. And likewise, Archive Grid is not the only thing like that. So the standard union catalog to French libraries, the Catalogue Collectif de France, has a dedicated tab right here for manuscripts and archives. So you can do the same search function in there. All right. So there are, my alarm just went off. I want to make sure we've got time for Q&A. I'm just going to run through these real quick. Note that, and again, these slides will be available on Bib site, so you can get to these later. I'm just plugging the Biography and Genealogy Master Index, which is a very useful biographical database that may be available free through your public library. Let's see. Oh, actually, that's a good question. All right. So does anybody have questions? Put them in the box. And while those come in, I'm going to go through these last few slides. Latin place names. Dooby-dooby-doo. I'm sorry if I spoke quickly. It was kind of a whirlwind tour. But yeah, I'll wait to see if there are some questions before I dig into these last slides.
It looks like there is one question, so I will read that one aloud. And that is, do you ever use first search of OCLC instead of WorldCat?
Oh, you're talking about the paid access model. It's funny. I when I worked in libraries, I used it all the time. And then when I lost that access, I got so used to using the public access WorldCat version that honestly, I don't remember what I'm missing. And I know I have access to it through the ABAA. And to be honest, I've just been too lazy to like log back in and see what I'm missing. So I don't know who asked that question, but if you want to share with some, the insights as to how it's better, I've completely forgotten, to be honest.
I will say that I've used first search and will like it because you can do a more faceted search from the get-go rather than WorldCat's Google style model. But now there's another question from Nina Muzinski. What was the biography database or website that you mentioned?
All right, so that I'll go ahead and plug it in the chat. It's called the Biography and Genealogy Master Index. So this is it's a very common biographical database that libraries subscribe to. So like I have access through the Boston Public Library. So it's I think it's for everyone, it's worth kind of investigating what electronic resources and database your public library offers, because you probably have access to more than you think. BGMI, which they call it for short, it is just an index. So these aren't full text biographies. But again, some of them may be older, some of them may be in public domain. So if BGI points you for example, to a public domain biographical resource, you may be able to find that pretty quickly in Google Books or HathiTrust.
I should also take this moment to plug the for BSA members, you have the opportunity to join the New York Society Library at a discounted rate. The Society Library also has an electronic membership option that gives you access to lots of databases. The benefit of the special option for BSA members is that you get access to interlibrary loan. So I put a chat in there for that. And I also put a link in the chat also to the ACLS Humanities ebook database, which is not going to give you any of the stuff here, but always good to sort of remember what you have access to as a BSA member. And the ACLS Humanities ebooks is $25 a year. Like it's worth it to just give it a try and see if it has what you need. There's another question here from George. When you catalog a book, do you show the author name as given or use the US name as given in VIAF?
Oh, that's a good question, George. And I assume you're asking if am I choosing between the author name as given on the item itself, or do I use the name as recorded in VIAF? So my principles is I'm not entirely consistent, but I will say I seldom use the name as given on the item itself. Without also using the name as recorded. So if it's let's see, I don't want to meander too much. All right, so I default to two different things. One is the Library of Congress authorized heading, so their version of the name that they want us to use. Or I will use the form of the name that the cataloging authority in the person's home country has decided to use. And those are often different. And sometimes I may use both, and I'll put one in parentheses, or if they're wildly different, I may include a number of parenthetical name spellings, just so that, people can find my stuff if they're searching, in Biblio or something like that. But yeah, the short answer is I defer to, the US version and or the version that's preferred by the individual's home country cataloging agency.
The next question is from Penny. Do you have tips on setting boundaries around time spent researching a particular item? That's such a good
Oh,
one.
that's a great question. This is what speaks to that rabbit hole discussion that I opened with. You know, again, like I do a lot of research, but I am very cognizant of the fact that I can't spend, you know, forever doing this. And so I focus on resources that would stand up in a court of scholarship, so to speak. So I use JSTOR a lot. I have access freely through the Boston Public Library. You may have access to JSTOR through your own public library. If you go with the New York Society Library e-subscription, you'll have access to JSTOR. I use Google Books a lot, but I tend to sort of avoid stuff that doesn't look too authoritative. You know, I trust university press books, you know, Brill, Routledge, some of the more reliable academic publishers. But I try to avoid information sources that just don't seem quite as authoritative. That doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong, right? They could be just as accurate. But as far as having to make like some sort of cut, the number of resources that I'm going to consult, that's one thing I do, is I just focus on the most reliable resources. And really, I often will give up on something. And I'm always asking myself, like, all right, you know, I've been working on this book for 3 hours. I've been working on it for a day. Will 1 more hour of research make it any more saleable, any more interesting? And often the answer is no, but sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes I feel like, you know, if I just go a little bit further, I can find something really interesting and useful that's going to make it really, really compelling to someone. Oh, all right. Well, Aaron, I'll let you ask the question.
Andrew Nadell asks, do you use USTC? It seems to get better every day.
I do use USTC. So that's usually the first thing I cite. It does have some problems. You know, there are some ghosts in there. There are duplicate records. It's not, you know, the cleanest as online bibliographies go. It's certainly not the cleanest resource, but it's something everybody has access to. And so if I cite a USTC number, I know that anybody else can see the same record and know what I'm talking about. And you're right, it does seem to get better every day. And it is sort of, you know, it keeps getting better. I know they recently expanded the coverage. So yeah, I do like USTC.
I have a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Good question. Can you comment on ISTC and the Searle thesauri?
I like them both a lot. So for those who don't know, ISTC is an incunabula short title catalog. It's maintained by the British Library. I use it a lot. Well, you know, when I'm working with incunabula, I'm in it all the time. And I think it is tremendously useful. And I think if you don't use ISTC and you're working on incunabula, I strongly recommend you do it, because there are some great ways to kind of search for by author, title, imprint, and kind of gauge where the book you're handling may fall in any number of chronologies. But it also provides citations for all the standard incunabula reference sources. So it's a great sort of portal to all of those. And the Searle thesauri too. So for those of you who don't know, the Consortium for European Research Libraries, or Searle, has been developing a number of resources to kind of augment the online investigation of incunabula. And Searle maintains a number of thesauri for incunabula. They've got one for, you know, annotated incunabula. And so I do dig into those, especially the material evidence, MEI, and incunabula, kind of get a sense of, if I have an annotated one, are there many others that are annotated, that kind of thing. So, we got another question.
The other part of the question was about the Searle thesauri.
Yeah. So I touched on that a little bit, and so I do use the Searle thesauri, not as much as I'd like to. You know, I often find myself stopping at ISTC, but there are, for those of you who haven't, it's worth exploring all those resources that they've developed.
Okay, the next question is from James Gray. He has been experiencing problems with the British Library. It looks like Sarah Werner put something in the chat that the British Library website is down. I don't know about that, but
I was actually in
whoa,
there, a cyber attack. Oh my
attack.
God.
Woo!
Yeah, I noticed I was actually, I'm rarely in ESCC, but I was in there yesterday, actually. I was like, why can't I access ESCC? So I'm glad all right, thank you. It's not just me. It's been cyber attacked.
Wow. Huh. I guess
Well,
that
I'm
makes
glad I don't
all
have
of
to
us who
use,
are like, who cares about the rare book database, feel a little bit less secure. Well, are there any more questions from the audience today? All right. Well, I want to thank the IOBA again for co-sponsoring this talk with us, which I know is going to become the most viewed video on our YouTube channels. People in the future will see me saying this and hope be able to tell me if I'm right or not. But this was just so useful and interesting. Thank you so much, Patrick. We're really lucky to have you as a member and so lucky to have you share your knowledge today.
Thanks for coming. Enjoy the weekend.
Yeah, happy Friday, everybody. Take good care. Bye-bye. See you next time.